In late 1857, Maurice B. Clark, a 28-year-old Englishman living in Cleveland, Ohio, made the biggest choice of his life so far. He would leave his comfortable position as a senior buyer and seller for a produce firm and set up a business of his own in the very same trade. He meant to become one more newly minted millionaire in this fast-growing city, and he possessed little besides an unshakable belief in his ability to do it. He was, by temperament, a natural hustler, restless, confident, and gifted with an instinct for where money could be made. Clark had escaped England roughly a decade earlier, worried that arrest was close at hand after he struck his employer and knocked him unconscious. He carried a quick temper and never entirely outgrew it. After emigrating to the United States, he worked his way west from New York, took whatever odd jobs he could find, and eventually ended up in Cleveland. There, he rose quickly through the mercantile world, learning how trade moved and where profits hid. Cleveland itself was swelling into a boomtown, positioned on a river and on Lake Erie, and functioning as a crucial transportation link between East and West. If there was ever a moment for a hard-driving young merchant to force his way forward and make a fortune, Clark believed, this was it. Yet one obstacle stood in his way. He did not have enough capital to launch the enterprise. To begin, he needed a collaborator, someone who could contribute real money. As he turned this over in his mind, one candidate rose to the surface, a young man named John D. Rockefeller, whom Clark had come to know at a commercial college they had both attended several years earlier. On the face of it, the choice seemed strange. Rockefeller was only 18. He worked as a bookkeeper for a fairly substantial produce shipping concern called Hewitt and Tuttle, and in temperament he was nearly Clark's opposite. Clark liked to live well. He enjoyed fine things, gambling, and women, and he could be sharp-tongued and combative. Rockefeller, by contrast, was deeply religious, unusually sober, and mild-mannered for someone his age. How could two such different men function as partners? And there was the practical issue. Clark estimated that a partner would need to supply at least $2,000 to get the firm moving. How could a bookkeeper from a family of limited means possibly have saved that amount? Still, Rockefeller had built a reputation in 2 short years as one of the most efficient and trustworthy clerks in Cleveland, someone who could be counted on to track every penny, prevent waste, and keep accounts solidly in the black. And there was another consideration, less noble but important. Rockefeller was so young that Clark assumed he could dominate the relationship. The question was worth putting to him. To Clark's surprise, when he proposed the partnership, Rockefeller not only embraced the idea with unexpected eagerness, but also produced the $2,000 with remarkable speed, somehow borrowing the funds. Rockefeller resigned from Hewitt and Tuttle, and in April 1858, the new firm, Clark and Rockefeller, opened its doors. In its early years, Clark and Rockefeller prospered. The two men, different as they were, complemented each other, and Cleveland offered abundant business for a competent produce house. Over time, however, Clark found himself increasingly irritated by his young partner and even faintly contemptuous. Rockefeller was more straight-laced than Clark had anticipated. He seemed to have no vices at all. His chief satisfaction appeared to come from the very ledgers he kept so meticulously and from devising small, relentless ways to reduce expenses. Though still young, he already carried a slumped posture from bending over books day and night. He dressed like a middle-aged banker and behaved like one too. Clark's brother James, who worked in the office, gave him a nickname that captured the impression perfectly: the Sunday school superintendent. Gradually, Clark began to think that Rockefeller was too dreary and colorless to serve as one of the company's public faces. He brought in a new partner from an established Cleveland family and removed Rockefeller's name from the firm's title, hoping the improved social sheen would attract even more trade. Rockefeller, for his part, did not seem bothered. He cared far more about earnings than about labels, and if dropping his name helped the bottom line, so much the better. The produce business continued to thrive, but before long, Cleveland began buzzing about a new commodity that promised the region something like its own gold rush: oil, newly discovered in rich veins in western Pennsylvania. In 1862, a young Englishman named Samuel Andrews, an inventor and entrepreneur who had known Clark back in England, came to their office and urged Clark to join him in the oil trade. Andrews boasted about oil's limitless promise, the array of valuable products that could be refined from it, and the relatively low costs of production. With a modest infusion of capital, he insisted, they could build a refinery and make a fortune. Clark's reaction was cautious. Oil was notorious for violent swings, prices rising and collapsing with little warning, and the Civil War was now raging, which made the future feel uncertain. He preferred involvement at a lower level rather than a full plunge. But when Andrews made the same pitch to Rockefeller, something visibly changed in the young man. A spark seemed to light in his eyes. Rockefeller pressed Clark to fund the refinery, declaring that he himself would see it through to success. Clark had never witnessed Rockefeller so animated about anything. That intensity, Clark decided, had to mean something. Under pressure from both men, he gave in. In 1863, they launched a new refining venture, Andrews, Clark and Company. That same year, some 20 other refineries sprang up in Cleveland, and competition became fierce. Clark found it strangely entertaining to watch Rockefeller at work. The former bookkeeper spent long hours in the refinery doing whatever needed doing, sweeping floors, polishing metal, rolling barrels, stacking hoops, as if he were courting the place. He stayed late into the night, hunting for ways to streamline operations and squeeze additional profit from every step. The refinery quickly became the firm's main engine of income, and Clark could not deny his satisfaction at having agreed to back it. But oil, for Rockefeller, turned into an obsession. He bombarded Clark with fresh proposals for expansion at precisely the moment when oil prices were more unstable than ever. Clark urged caution. He found the chaos and volatility unnerving and believed they should move slowly. As time passed, Clark struggled to conceal his irritation. Rockefeller, buoyed by the refinery's success, was beginning to act self-assured, perhaps even inflated. Clark repeatedly reminded him whose initiative had launched their original business. Like a refrain, he needled Rockefeller with the same question. What in the world would you have done without me? Then Clark learned that Rockefeller had borrowed $100,000 for the refinery without consulting him. Furious, he ordered Rockefeller never to go behind his back again and to stop pushing for expansion. Yet nothing Clark said seemed to restrain him. For someone so quiet and outwardly unassuming, Rockefeller could be maddeningly relentless, persistent in the way of a child who will not let go of an idea. Months after one scalding, he returned with another request, Clark's signature for yet another substantial loan. At last, Clark snapped. "If that's the way you want to do business," he burst out, "we'd better dissolve and let you run your own affairs to suit yourself." Clark did not truly want the partnership to end. It was highly profitable, and for all the traits that grated on him, he relied on Rockefeller to manage the dull but vital details of a growing enterprise. His threat was meant as intimidation, the only lever he felt that could make Rockefeller back away from his tireless drive to enlarge the refinery quickly. As usual, Rockefeller said little and appeared to yield. The following month, Rockefeller invited Clark and Andrews to his home to discuss the future. Despite all the warnings Clark had delivered, Rockefeller laid out even bolder plans for expansion. Clark once again lost control. "We'd better split up," he shouted. Something unexpected followed. Rockefeller agreed. Calmly, without any visible anger, he got both Clark and Andrews to confirm that they too favored dissolving the partnership. He did it with not a trace of resentment. Clark had played plenty of poker, and he convinced himself Rockefeller was bluffing, trying to force his hand. Clark imagined that if he refused to budge on expansion, Rockefeller would have no choice but to retreat. Rockefeller could not afford to stand alone. He needed Clark more than Clark needed him. Over time, Rockefeller would realize his impulsiveness, return chastened, and ask to restore the partnership. Then Clark could dictate the terms and demand that Rockefeller follow his lead. The young man would be humbled, and order would be restored. Instead, Clark opened the local newspaper the next day and saw a formal announcement that the business had been dissolved, an announcement plainly placed by Rockefeller himself. When Clark confronted him later, Rockefeller replied evenly that he was only carrying out what they had agreed upon the previous day, that the idea had originated with Clark, and that he believed Clark had been right. He proposed they settled matters by auction, selling the company to whoever bid the highest. Something about Rockefeller's flat, businesslike manner made Clark bristle. Still, an auction was not necessarily a disaster. Clark assumed he could outbid the upstart, take control, and be rid of him for good. At the auction in February 1865, Clark employed a lawyer to represent him, while Rockefeller represented himself, another mark, Clark thought, of Rockefeller's arrogance and lack of refinement. The bids climbed steadily. Then Rockefeller offered $72,500, a startling, even absurd sum, far beyond anything Clark could pay. How could Rockefeller possibly have that kind of money, and how could he imagine running the business without Clark? To Clark, it looked like a loss of common sense. If Rockefeller truly had the funds and was willing to pay such a price, then let him take it. Good riddance. Under the terms of the sale, Rockefeller won the refinery but had to relinquish the produce business without compensation. Clark was satisfied, though it irritated him that Andrews chose to remain with Rockefeller rather than leave with Clark. In the months that followed, Maurice Clark began to reconsider the entire episode. A nagging uneasiness grew in him. Perhaps Rockefeller had been preparing for this outcome for months, maybe for more than a year. Rockefeller must have been cultivating bankers and arranging loans well in advance if he could afford that final bid. He must have secured Andrews's loyalty ahead of time as well. Clark even thought he detected, on the day the refinery became Rockefeller's, a faintly gloating look in the young man's eye, something Clark had never noticed in that sober, restrained face. Had Rockefeller's quiet dullness been a mask? As the years unfolded and Rockefeller amassed immense wealth from this first decisive move, Clark could not shake the suspicion that he had been maneuvered, outplayed without realizing it, and beaten by the very man he had once assumed he could control.